Welcome into the latest edition of ESPN FC. I'm Dan Thomas, joined by Craig Burley and Ali Moreno. Where to start today? How about Manchester City in action against Real Madrid in the second leg of the Champions League Semifinal? Finally poised this game. 1-1, of course, after the first leg at the Santiago. Stats don't lie here. They were dominant from start to finish. We'll welcome in, shall we? Frank Leboeuf joins us, as is, I imagine, a very happy Nedum Anur. We're here from the boys in a moment. Craig, that first half, I can't remember a game with so much at stake at this level that has seen a team be so dominant.
4-0, and Thibaut Courtois was outstanding. Outstanding. And City still won 4-0. I've never seen an elite side, Champions League holders, with the calibre of player that Real Madrid have, as open and being destroyed with every possession in the first 45. I've never seen a side so open. If City had won 2 or 3-0 at the Bernabeu, I could understand that if Real Madrid were chasing the game. It was 1-1, it was poised, it was anybody's game. And yet this City side were able to make this Real Madrid side look so dishevelled, it was embarrassing. I think we saw the deficiencies in the middle of the park for Real Madrid, the lack of legs, and City took advantage of that. The position, the rotation, the passing. I mean, how many times did John Stones pick the ball up, or Rodri, and there was a 20-yard gaping hole in the middle of the park, particularly in the first half? It was embarrassing from a Real Madrid perspective, and it was, I think, the best performance in Guardiola's tenure as manager. Bearing in mind what's at stake, bearing in mind the opposition, and we've talked about it. What were the crowd going to be like? Mm-hmm. How was that going to affect the players? Tonight we got the answer. Big boys stood up.
Yeah. Look, backside whooping. This was a clinic. It was a clinic. And when I say a clinic, I mean it looked like Manchester City had 20 players on the field and Real Madrid had 5.
Yeah.
They could never get close to the ball. And we'll talk about Real Madrid in a second. But let me just focus on Manchester City. I was thinking, because you just mentioned of the dominance of the performance, I was thinking back in Champions League, what comes close to this in this sort of environment, in this sort of stage? And perhaps Barcelona against Manchester United in Champions League final, in that legendary now Barcelona squad, and how dominant they were against a team of the quality of Manchester United. This was even better. This first half from Manchester City, man, let me tell you, they're just passing the ball, and Real Madrid are looking at each other. And the context, and I think this is important, the context of who they're doing this against. Real Madrid, with all their toys and all their experience and all their history, and they're looking at each other, we have no answers. We do not know what to do. We can't complete 3 passes. And this is not an exaggeration. They could not complete 3 passes. They couldn't get out of their defensive third. Never mind their half. Their defensive third, they couldn't get out. And so the pressing and counter-pressing of Manchester City, and then the movement with the ball and without the ball. This was beautiful to watch from Manchester City's perspective. From Real Madrid, mommy!
Yeah, we'll talk about Real Madrid more later on. But Nedum, I text my son who was at the game at half-time and said, you boys are looking brilliant. There's no way you can muck this up. And he said, with City, we always find a way in the Champions League to do it. At what stage did you breathe?
For me personally, it was after the third one. Even though the first half was amazing, like as guys have said, it's one of the best performances I've seen at this stage of the competition. The nature of the team it was against as well was really something. I think there was a statistic that came up, and after 15 minutes, Madrid had 13 passes, and I think this is one of those zero-sum type moments where City were playing so well that it made Real Madrid just look so poor. They tried to show character and moving around the back Madrid, but City were defending really well. Then if it went long, like there was a point where Vinicius Junior was running towards goal, but Kyle Walker swept it up so well. And then from the way that they were pinning the Madrid players back to a certain extent, they were able to move, find little pockets, making the right decisions. It just felt surreal, to be honest, because this is the Real Madrid side which everybody understands doesn't necessarily always need to be its best to be able to compete, but now they're at their best and they're not competing. And you start to see some of the disconnect in the team. You're seeing Vinicius Junior pointing at defence, saying, come forward. You're seeing Modric looking around for somewhere to play the ball, but the option wasn't there. And the moment at times for some of them it just looked a bit too big. I think they were better at the start of the second half, but overall, that's a magnificent performance by Man City. The fans themselves look like they really enjoyed themselves. The players earned the right to be in that position. And, if you're going to have a big win to get yourself into a final, we'll beat Real Madrid 4-0 at home with all your fans there. Like, that's truly incredible. Credit to them, credit to the manager, because, it wasn't that long ago, like maybe a few months ago, where a few people were writing them off thinking, well, they're struggling a little bit. But as I say, that's one of the best performances I've seen. And it was a pleasure to see it done against Real Madrid in the competition that they're involved in.
Frank, you said 4-1 on yesterday's show. How'd you get this so wrong?
Yeah, I really thought Karim Benzema would score a goal. When I say, going back to that prediction, I say that's for me the difference of quality in every level that I see between Manchester City and Real Madrid. And we didn't see that the first leg, but that was obvious, especially the first half. And I have to say that, yes, City played fantastically. But can we go back to Real Madrid? We have Rudiger in the first leg, who has been fantastic against Haaland. And I really thought that Carlo Ancelotti is a master of perfection. But are we allowed to criticize a little bit the master? I really think that he should have reinforced his defensive lines, because he knew that everything was coming from everybody in Manchester City, with all the opportunities of players moving around. The first goal that they conceded, you can see Alaba not knowing what he has to do, and he decides to go backwards to mark Gundogan when he should have gone to Silva, who in fact remained free and had an easy shot to score. I think Rudiger and Militao should have played, both of them, and maybe Camavinga should have been in the middle of the park, because really Kroos, Valverde and Modric at the Al Ittihad Stadium against Manchester City, very offensive. It's not those three guys who can hold the middle of the park, and for me that was a big mistake. But overall, what City offered to the fans of football in a neutral way like we are, it's absolutely fantastic, and I don't see any team being able to cope with them. Can you imagine that, just a point, that Alvarez can be winning the quadruple if City wins the Premier League, the FA Cup and the Champions League? That's amazing.
I'm not sure it would have made too much of a difference.
I think if had Rudiger on and as a 12th man, I don't think it made much of a difference. City with that.
Militao come in, we expected that. They were just absolutely horsed all over the field. I mean, Grealish got a lot of criticism last year. I was one of them, and I don't take it back. I think he was maybe just taking his time to get in his stride, and maybe a bit like Mahrez when he first went to City. It took him a little while to get the manager's way of thinking over, quicker in possession, working hard. But boy, has Jack Grealish stepped up to the plate, in all fairness to him. Seems like a great lad, works hard, wanted that battle with Carvajal after the first game, came out on top, and Gundogan again. I mean, that link-up with Gundogan and Haaland in the second half, which resulted in another great save from Thibaut Courtois, was quite amazing. And you look at somebody like Akanji. Akanji was at Dortmund and was error-prone. Yeah. Error-prone. City recruited him, looked at him and thought, we can work with this guy. He's quick, he's good on the ball, he could fit in here. He wasn't somebody... He was a talented player, but he wasn't somebody that everybody in Europe was chasing. When you think about City going out, and they've got a lot of money, but they've recruited at times, Ederson, Stones come in, Walker was a lot of money, but Akanji was a bit of a left field one. As I said, making quite a few mistakes in there. And he has been absolutely brilliant. So, listen, we're talking about Arsenal. When you're talking about Arsenal, have they bottled it in the Premier League? And yes, they've not finished the season well. But look what they're up against.
Yeah.
Look at this team they're up against.
We watched this together, and it was interesting. You were so impressed with the way that Bernardo Silva took that second goal.
I thought his second goal was better than his first.
Why? What is it that makes it...
Well, the first one was natural for him. He comes in on his left foot. He's got two choices. The shot to the far corner was blocked, so he gave the goalkeepers the eyes. This, as Ali said, I mean, Alaba's on the line. It looks easy. It looks like, he just headed it over him. No. This is a terrific piece of skill that could easily have gone awry. He's basically just sponged that over the, just a little lob with the head. I thought that was terrific. And to be fair to him, he was one of the players that I felt...
Because you said maybe Mahrez should start.
I felt he was one of the players after his performance, which wasn't a bad performance in the Bernabeu, but it wasn't his best. And I thought, will Guardiola think about Mahrez running at Camavinga because he's not a fullback? But no, he went, no. Silva's been brilliant. Wasn't great in Spain, but he's been brilliant for me. Played him again. Got his just rewards. The little man was terrific.
That second goal, to answer your question, he took it as if he were playing soccer tennis on the regen day following the match day. Right? When you're messing around and you just kind of lob it with your head over the net and over the guy. The problem is, slight issue, semifinals of Champions League. And yet in the moment, you see that level of execution. Now, you're seeing it there from Bernardo Silva, but you're seeing execution all over the field from Manchester City at a high level, at a really high level. I mean, we can talk about every player from Manchester City and have something really positive to say. Rodri, how he controls the game, the pace of the game, how he's always available, how he always seems to be an outlet. When the ball goes to the right-hand side and now they need to get to the left, there he is. Give it to me. I'll find it over there. When we need to splitting pass that is going to spring everything open so that we get out in transition, here you go. I'll find that pass. When we need to win the ball back, I'll be the one stepping in and winning it. He was outstanding, but in a team in which everybody's outstanding, it's difficult to highlight the individual. They were fantastic.
What's interesting on that point, Nadem, if we were to rank today's players from 1 to 11, maybe Bernardo Silva, because of his goals, is 1 and 1. Erling Haaland and Kevin De Bruyne, the two big stars, really, when you think about this team, would be low down. Neither of them had a great match. Kevin De Bruyne looked a bit off in the final third. Erling Haaland, of course, Courtois denied him on a couple of occasions, would have expected to have scored at least one goal.
I think whereas from the Madrid side, you were seeing, as I say, some of the forwards complaining at the back line saying, why are you not doing this, why are you not doing that? Well, the answer is usually, as the defender, you can't do it unless the guys up front are starting to apply the pressure as well. But I think for City, the organisation that they had defensively was really, really good. And as a consequence, you didn't really see Real Madrid really take City apart that much, playing through them, always some of the runs. And that starts from the top. So even though they weren't great in offence, like De Bruyne walks off with an assist, or in fact with 2 assists, and then Haaland himself knows that on a different day he probably scores 2 or 3 goals. So it's not bad when 2 of your key players like that can have a day where things aren't perfect, but they still do a job for the team, and that's one of the big reasons why they're in contention to win that treble.
I think the only one you can look.
Craig,
Go on.
Joe, sorry, because we are ranking the players, and I think if we have to put, Silva and Grealish, because Grealish had a hell of a game as well. I think for me, one of the main men today was Kyle Walker, because we didn't see Vinicius Junior. And on the first leg as well, he did very well. But the second leg today, I mean, Vinicius didn't exist. First half, he tried to overtake him, and we know the pace of Vinicius Junior. Kyle Walker hated today. He hated him, and that was amazing. He didn't exist. And Kyle Walker brought something offensively, but defensively, he was a monster.
Kevin De Bruyne played a few overweighted passes that were unlike him from good positions. I mean, he was drifting into positions he must have thought it was Christmas. I mean, he had nobody within 50 yards of him.
I'm not saying he was rubbish. I'm not saying that he was putting...
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying the positions that he was allowed to drift into were quite amazing. I'm giving you an explanation here.
Right, OK.
Right. The Haaland one, I think, is a bit harsh. The first one he should have scored when he headed it at Courtois.
Yes.
The other 2 were magnificent saves.
Right.
Because the angle was against him for the strike, and the header was brilliant. Rising up as he did, he headed it back the way it came to the far corner. It was just an absolutely brilliant save. Do you know the one thing that interested me during the game as well is when the aforementioned Kevin De Bruyne was shouting at his manager.
Yes, yeah.
And I thought, I was watching him going, he was running with his head turned. Guardiola's shouting at him. He's shouting at Guardiola, and I'm thinking, is he going to take him off here?
Yeah.
And he's thought...
Brought you back, I imagine, a few years.
Guardiola's thought, I'm having a player shout at me, but I'm going to pick my fights.
Yeah.
And it's not De Bruyne, and it's not a Champions League semi-final.
Should we talk Real Madrid?
Sure, why not?
Where did it go wrong?
Showing up.
Was it just a case of that even at their best, they couldn't have handled City today?
Look, this version of Manchester City is untouchable by Real Madrid or by anybody else in the world. Having said that, let's put that to the side for a second. We have been saying for a while now, for Real Madrid, that they've been having performances over the course of the season in La Liga where we watch them week in and week out, and they are disinterested, and they don't care. And our excuse for them, built-in excuse, hey, Champions League, this team is different. A different version of...
Because of what we've seen in the past.
Right. And so we lean on that, and I think they themselves lean on that. But if you haven't been all that good over the course of a whole long season, and you have had more than one dip over the course of that long season, those things tend to show up in the worst moments. You can't just be an average team and then become a great team just because of the night, just because of the stage, just because of the moment. The flaws that they have shown over the course of the season in La Liga, they all showed up today. When things got difficult for Real Madrid today, the team, they got disconnected. They were no longer a sense of a group. They got disorganized. When they figured out that they couldn't go in transition, that they couldn't get possession of the ball, now Vinicius not working back is no longer a, oh, well, look how Vinicius, what he does is that he's just waiting for the transition. Well, now it's one less body defending. When Karim Benzema doesn't get involved in any sort of build-up play or provide you the outlet that he usually does for this team and that they rely upon him to provide, then it's one less player. So now you're defending not with 11 players, now you're defending with 9 against a team like Manchester City that is playing at the level that they were playing. Rodrigo, nowhere to be found. Valverde, nowhere to be found. Toni Kroos, Luka Modric. And look at the names that I'm saying here. These are not small names. These are world superstars. Nowhere to be found in terms of possession, in terms of leadership, in terms of presence, in terms of being Real Madrid. This team had been given signs over the course of the year that they had a performance like this in them, and it eventually caught up to them. And Manchester City exposed everything that had been wrong with this team over the course of the season.
I think you can maybe take it back a bit further than that. I think if you look at the big games in the Champions League last year, including City, the stats might not be too dissimilar. I think if you look at the Champions League final against Liverpool, the stats might not be too dissimilar. And as Ali said, and that was a point that I was thinking about as well, is it's all very well talking about Vinicius Junior in particular cheating and not chasing back. But when you're playing against teams that are producing this kind of quality, it can't be done.
Right.
It maybe can be done on the odd occasion, but it can't be done on a regular basis, not against the elite teams. You can't leave, particularly when you've got guys in the middle of the park that are, mid-30s and above, some of them, 2 of them. You can't leave them as exposed as that front 3 in particular left them exposed tonight. Also, even when Benzema got the ball to feet, it wasn't. He didn't look himself, did he? He gave it away and passed the ball out of play at one point for a 5-yard pass. And it's hard to blame the back 4. It's hard to look at the back 4 of Real Madrid and go, well, because what do you do when you're getting no protection and you have the best club side probably in the world in terms of talent and the football they play, coming at you wave after wave after wave, and you've got runners from midfield that are not getting picked up, and Gundogan, you've got De Bruyne and floating around, you've got John Stones popping in there, you've got... What do you do as a back 4? There's only so... And by the way, you're trying to take care of Erling Haaland.
Yeah.
There's only so much you can do if the rest of the team are not functioning. And quite frankly, this Real Madrid team are not functioning properly. That's why they got hammered tonight. That's why they were a country mile off Barcelona, who we know are not a great side. Barcelona, by the way, who finished below Bayern Munich and Inter in the group stage in the Champions League and were put out by Man United. So it kind of tells you where Real Madrid are. And I think we saw in Ancelotti a manager who sat at the side and just did not have any answers tonight.
Frank, were you surprised how poor they were?
You know what? Last year, and it's what Craig, is what I agree with what Craig just said. I felt that they were holding results, by a string, and it proved that against Paris Saint-Germain, against Chelsea, against Manchester City, it was really a miracle. It's what I call a miracle because statistically talking, they didn't do what they had to do, but somehow they had something special who brought them to a win. But I felt that there was something wrong there, and that somehow the truth will come out. And today, the truth has come out because that's what it is. You cannot criticize the back four. They try to do their best. But in the middle of the park, when Valverde is not at his top, you have nobody to defend. If Vinicius Junior and Rodrigo doesn't do the job, you are completely unbalanced. And if Karim Benzema doesn't fill the goal, you're going to struggle. It's something you have to change. It's going to come out, Tchouaméni maybe next season with Camavinga in the middle of the park. It's going to stabilize the situation. But you have to renew something in order to be again successful. You've been successful last season, I think, and I'm sorry, and I don't hate Real Madrid as you could have mentioned, Dan, sometimes. It's just that I felt that it was an accident. That wasn't the reality of the Madrid game and the power of that team, of that squad. And we know that Real Madrid can be at the top, but today they show all the weaknesses to the face of the world because that's what it is, and the reality of Real Madrid.
I imagine, Nathan, from a City perspective, watching it, you were thinking, right, Real Madrid are going to find that extra gear in a moment because it's Real Madrid, but that just never came or even really looked like coming.
Yeah, I think that's fair. But one thing I thought, I think many people thought this as well, is that in that second half, they couldn't play as badly as they did in the first. And for the first maybe 5-10 minutes of that second half, they were playing better. But ultimately, they didn't really create much off the back of that. And then before you know it, there was a point where they took a step back and City gained control again within the game. Because, as I say, it's that whole thing, like we say it, but it's Real Madrid and it's the Champions League. You say it because you've seen it happen before. As Frank was alluding to last season, the route to the final to winning that trophy, there were lots of moments in games where it felt as if it was the wrong result for them to go through. But then that's the thing, it's Real Madrid, it's the Champions League. So you just have this feeling that while City were 1-0 up or even at 0-0, Madrid would just find something and it would just happen. But as the guys have said, and those who watch Real Madrid throughout the season, this has been something which doesn't surprise them. And ultimately today, they did offer one of those performances, but they were able to be punished by a side who, probably had their best game of the whole season, arguably, like Guardiola's whole tenure, and they were able to punish them for that whole period. So fair play to Man City. They made Real Madrid look extra basic. And it's not something that we're used to seeing, especially in this competition, in these final stages, because many of us can remember times when City have gone out and other teams have gone out. But for myself, up until this point, I can't remember many losses Madrid have had in Europe. But this is one of those ones which I think, from a City perspective, you'll speak about for a long time to come.
But if you look at, Ancelotti, if we're being critical and he's had a lot of praise, John Stones looked like a natural midfielder. That's how much time and space he had. I thought Rodri was brilliant again. Brilliantly efficient. He just takes the ball and he allows them to shepherd it from one side to the other. He takes it off the defenders, switches play. But none of this was a surprise for Ancelotti.
Right.
He came into this game, Guardiola, as I said, I'm not doing anything different. This is what we've done most of the year. We've had success. I'm not going to tinker. So they knew Rodri and Stones, for the most part, were going to be in the middle. And yet he allowed those two wide guys, Rodrigo and Vinicius Junior, to stand up out in the wide position while they got absolutely screwed in the middle of the park. That's poor. It's not like City did anything tonight and went, didn't see that coming.
Right.
He played it the way they've been playing it for weeks.
The worst
and it's
thing,
been successful.
Sorry, Craig. The worst thing that could have happened for Real Madrid is going into the Camp Nou and have the performance that they had in beating Barcelona 4-0 in Copa del Rey semifinal. And the reason I say that is because that was sort of the beginning of Carlo Ancelotti playing Rodrigo on the right, because he gives this team a natural outlet and a credible threat on the right-hand side. But it sacrifices an extra body in the midfield. And if they ever needed an extra body in the midfield, was today. But how do you, as a manager, rationalize to yourself and to your players, hey, we went to the Camp Nou and won 4-0, playing with these guys, with this squad, with this group, right? We were dominant. We were good in transition. We dominated the midfield. And not think to yourself, this is my best 11. This is my best group. But it may not have been what the game called for. And I know that this is probably something that Carlo Ancelotti is going to think about and say, well, we could have played with that Valverde hybrid role, and that's how they were successful in last year's Champions League. But he himself in the press conference said, that's what got us Champions League last year, but this is what has gotten us to the semifinals of Champions League this year, and so this is how we're going to go. A decision that I think he's going to regret.
I think he exposed two of his greatest players, two of Real Madrid's, I'd say, greatest midfielders. Certainly, obviously, in the last 10 years, they've been two of the best midfielders in world football. Toni Kroos and Luka Modric, in particular. Valverde's a younger lad. He exposed them to arguably one of the biggest pummelings of their careers. Yeah. And he left them exposed, and he sat on the bench and watched it. You know, not for 10 minutes, not for 20 minutes, for 40, 45 minutes. He sat there and watched those two in particular been dragged from pillar to post. And he kind of allowed... And look, I'm not suggesting if they got everybody back in and Vinicius Jr. was 10 yards, 20 yards deeper and 10 yards narrower, and Rodrigo the same, and Benzema was 20 yards deeper, I'm not suggesting City wouldn't have won. But they certainly would not have been exposed to the embarrassing positions they found themselves in. I mean, it was a chasing, wasn't it? They were running round like... Whenever they turned round, a City player had 20 yards free space to run into. And whenever they closed that down, City switched it, did another 20 yards. And my criticism of Ancelotti is not that they could have been the better team, because they could not have, but he let some of the best midfielders that have played this game be exposed to one of the biggest pastings they've probably had, probably in their career.
Ancelotti said he wants to stay at Real Madrid as long as they want him. If you're Florentino Perez, the president of Real Madrid, what do you do?
Well, I look at what the options are, and I evaluate the current situation of the club and what is the plan going forward. This is a team, and I think we must acknowledge this, there's a transition happening. We just mentioned Luka Modric and Toni Kroos. How do you transition away from Luka Modric and Toni Kroos? Casemiro's already gone, and so you feel like now that the wheels are turning and you're having to find players who are going to be the players that whoever is managing Real Madrid is going to call upon for the next decade or so.
You get rid of him?
If I'm Florentino Perez, I do not get rid of Carlo Ancelotti. If I don't find a better option, and what are the options?
I've got Zinedine Zidane here.
Where is he? I don't see him.
He's next to me.
Hey, Zizou.
Yeah, I know. Frank is an idiot.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I stay with Carlo Ancelotti because I'm thinking I'm bridging a gap for what I think I want next. And for what I think I want next is what other managers are being groomed for, whether that's Xabi Alonso or whether that's Raúl. If you bring Zinedine Zidane, this becomes a longer-term project. You keep Carlo Ancelotti for the next season. Ancelotti, if he wants to stay, because he can go and take the Brazil job, which, Carlo, you don't have to listen to me, but go take the Brazil job. All right?
I thought you were going to offer yourself as an assistant.
Well, if you need an assistant as well, I dabble in Portuguese every once in a while. Look, I think you have Carlo Ancelotti be part of this transition if indeed he doesn't take the Brazil job. And then you go and search for what you think is going to be the next guy for the long-term period. And that long-term may be Xabi Alonso or Raúl. If you go Zinedine Zidane, it changes the trajectory of the club.
Last year. It's been a long day.
Hasn't really.
You don't know what my day's been like.
Oh, I do. You've told me about it. You got up at 6. You had to take the dogs out before you went and played golf. That's what I hear.
Real Madrid players might as well. I tell you what, it looked like the Real Madrid players took the dogs out at 6 this morning as well.
And played golf.
Look. Yesterday I thought, nah, Ancelotti will stay. And we talked on the show yesterday about, do the Real Madrid fans have an acceptance that City are a better side.
Yeah.
And they might win, but that's kind of where they are.
It's the manner of the defeat.
But what we saw tonight, you know as well as anybody, how there's knee-jerk reactions to bad performances. And that was an embarrassment. And whether Florentino Perez feels that, as Ali said, probably the pertinent thing to do would be sit with him until you get somebody better. But does he want to make a noise to get a Real or somebody to get the fans, we're front foot football, no more of this defending, no more of this counter-attack, we're going to make some changes. Just because that was such an embarrassment. I wonder if it had been 1-0 and City had got through and had dominated, but Real Madrid had hung in there, give himself a chance, I think possibly it might have been a different story, but that could signal, that defeat and the manner of it could signal possibly the end for him.
It's the manner of the defeat, and it's their competition, isn't it? They always talk about Champions League is Real Madrid's baby, and yet they've been exposed in front of the world today, Frank. Would Zidane want the job back?
I don't know. I didn't call him, but we talked about that a month ago. It's always a possibility to see Zidane. It depends on what they want to do and what Perez wants to do. I wouldn't go because I think you need to turn the page and try to see something different. And like Barcelona did with Xavi, maybe going to Raúl, trying to go for a different way of playing with a long-term process and getting back to your best maybe within 3 or 4 years. It's a possibility. But it's always a possibility with Zizou. Zizou is there. He loves the club. He doesn't want to move from there. And I think it's always at Real Madrid disposal. And if they call him back, he might be successful again. You never know.
Well, thank you very much for watching ESPN on YouTube. For more sports highlights and analysis, be sure to download the ESPN app. And for live streaming, premium content, and let's not forget as well, ESPN FC 7 days a week. Subscribe to ESPN Plus.